Michael Jordan sees a teacher laugh at a boy who stutters. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Jordan's life had always been defined by his drive, his will to be the best, and his relentless pursuit of greatness. From his early years in Wilmington, North Carolina, to becoming a global icon, his journey had been shaped by the lessons learned on the basketball court. But what truly set him apart from other athletes was not just his incredible talent, his 5 MVP awards, or his 6 NBA championships. It was his ability to inspire others, to make people believe in themselves when the odds seemed impossible. For most of the world, Michael Jordan was known as the greatest basketball player to ever live. His name had become synonymous with winning, with excellence, and with unmatched determination. But for the people who truly knew him, the world saw only part of the story. Jordan's success wasn't just about basketball. It was about his unwavering commitment to self-improvement, his ability to inspire others to reach their potential, and the quiet moments of personal reflection that drove him to achieve greatness. This is where the documentary begins, not with the story of a superstar on the basketball court, but with the story of the man behind the legend. The camera pulls back from the flashbulbs and the cheers of packed arenas to reveal Michael Jordan standing alone in a quiet hallway. His thoughts are focused, but the weight of his success, his responsibility to others, and his desire to do more than just dominate the game have begun to weigh on him. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was playing for the countless people who looked up to him, who saw in his greatness a reflection of their own potential. As a kid, Jordan had been like any other, full of ambition but unsure of where his life would lead. He had worked tirelessly to perfect his game, earning a spot on the varsity team in high school after being cut the previous year. The sting of that failure had shaped his entire career. He used it as fuel, pushing himself beyond what anyone thought was possible. The road to greatness was not without its obstacles, and Jordan had to fight against self-doubt, external criticism, and even physical limitations. But through it all, he had remained focused on the one thing that mattered: winning. Jordan's high school years were filled with ups and downs. While his talent was evident, he wasn't always the best player on the court. It was only after being cut from his high school team that he began to push himself in ways he never had before. That setback, that feeling of inadequacy, had lit a fire within him that would never go out. His passion for the game grew even stronger, and it drove him to work harder, to fight harder, and to perfect his craft until he had earned a spot not only on the team but as one of its most important players. That spirit would follow him all the way to the University of North Carolina, where his college career began to take shape. It was here that Jordan truly began to turn heads, catching the attention of coaches, scouts, and basketball fans alike. He would go on to hit the game-winning shot in the 1982 NCAA championship, proving that he could perform when it mattered most. That moment would become the first of many defining moments in Jordan's career. As the story of Jordan's rise continues, the documentary begins to explore the different sides of him, not just the athlete, but the person behind the competitive nature. While most of the world saw him as a superstar, there were quieter moments that defined his legacy, moments that his teammates, coaches, and even rivals recognized. His fierce dedication, his leadership, and his humility despite his status were part of what made him the most admired player in the world. In the locker room, Jordan was more than just a player. He was the driving force that pushed everyone around him to elevate their game. His leadership style was different from other superstars. It wasn't about demanding respect, it was about earning it through action. Jordan expected the best from himself, and by extension, expected the same from his teammates. His relentless work ethic and the way he led by example forced his teammates to become better versions of themselves, to rise to the occasion, and to understand that winning wasn't just about talent. It was about mindset, about playing with intensity and focus every single game. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. Jordan had his fair share of setbacks. His early years with the Chicago Bulls were filled with frustration as the team struggled to break through the ceiling of mediocrity. The Bulls were talented, but they weren't winning championships. Jordan was playing out of his mind, but without the necessary pieces around him, the championship glory remained elusive. This period of failure would become one of the most important lessons of his career. Winning requires more than just individual brilliance. It requires teamwork, sacrifice, and the right environment. It was the 1989 to 1990 season that marked a turning point. Jordan had become the undisputed best player in the world, but he had also learned the value of collaboration. This season was a defining moment in Jordan's career, as he not only led his team to a stronger record but also began to understand the importance of leadership. He realized that his greatness was not just about his own performance but about elevating those around him. That season would lead to the first of many NBA championships, but more importantly, it was the foundation upon which his legacy was built. The documentary delves deeper into Jordan's transformation, focusing on his growth both as an athlete and as a person. His off-the-court demeanor, often quiet and reserved, was a stark contrast to his on-court ferocity. But it was this duality that made him a legend. His passion for the game was unmatched, but his humility was also what allowed him to connect with his fans and his teammates. As the documentary progresses, we move beyond Jordan's accolades, championships, and moments of triumph, focusing on the lasting impact he had on the game of basketball and the world around him. Through interviews with players, coaches, and people who witnessed his career firsthand, we learn about the humility and selflessness that defined him as much as his competitiveness. His influence went beyond basketball. He was a cultural icon who inspired millions, showing them that no dream was too big to achieve if you had the right mindset. The film then shifts its focus from the championship rings, the MVP awards, and the other accolades to explore Jordan's profound impact on the people he encountered. He didn't just play the game for personal glory, he played to inspire, to change lives. One of the most poignant moments of Jordan's career came off the court when he stepped into an unexpected classroom. The teacher, a stern figure in the front of the room, had no idea that his actions would be interrupted. But it was in that classroom, after hearing the cruel laughter at a student's expense, that Jordan's legacy would take another step forward, one that would define him not just as a basketball player, but as a hero in the truest sense. This moment, the catalyst for a bigger story, would mark the beginning of the next chapter in Michael Jordan's journey, not just to be the greatest on the court, but to be a voice for change, for kindness, and for standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. It would be an unforgettable chapter in the life of a man who had already written history. It was a typical day for Michael Jordan, the legendary basketball player, in the midst of his career that spanned over 2 decades. He had just finished a grueling series of interviews, promoting his latest endorsement deal, and was preparing to head out for a quick meeting with some of his old teammates. But then, as he walked through the hallways of a public school in Chicago for a charity event, something caught his attention. Jordan had always been committed to giving back to the community. He understood that his fame came with a responsibility to inspire and uplift those around him, especially children. He was passionate about supporting youth sports programs, encouraging students to follow their dreams, and reminding them that hard work could lead to success. But today, he was about to witness something that would shake him to his core. As he walked by an open classroom door, he overheard the sound of laughter. It wasn't the joyful laughter of children sharing a joke or having fun, it was mocking, cruel laughter, coming from an adult. Jordan paused, instinctively feeling that something wasn't right. He stepped closer, trying to peer inside without drawing attention to himself. In the middle of the classroom stood a young boy, struggling to read aloud from his textbook. His voice shook, his words stumbled, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. He had a stutter. It wasn't a heavy one, but it was enough to make him feel self-conscious, especially in front of his classmates. The boy was trying his best, but it was clear that he was embarrassed, struggling to get the words out. What caught Jordan's attention, however, wasn't the boy's difficulty. It was the sound of the teacher's laughter, a laugh that wasn't gentle, but instead a harsh, mocking sound. The teacher, standing at the front of the room, seemed to find the boy's struggle amusing. The laughter from the teacher echoed through the classroom, and several of the students joined in. The boy's face flushed red, and his hands fidgeted nervously. He tried to continue, but the laughter only grew louder. The teacher's words were sharp and dismissive, saying something like, "Come on, you can do better than this. It's not that hard." Jordan felt a rush of emotions, anger, disappointment, and disbelief. He had seen plenty of competitors face challenges on the court, but he had never seen someone in a position of authority, someone who should be nurturing and encouraging, act in such a cruel manner. For a moment, he stood frozen in the hallway, watching the scene unfold. The boy was doing his best, yet he was being ridiculed for something he couldn't control. Jordan had grown up facing adversity of his own. He wasn't always the star player. He was cut from his high school varsity basketball team, an experience that deeply shaped him. That rejection had fueled his desire to prove himself, and eventually, it became part of what drove him to be the player he was. Jordan understood what it felt like to be underestimated and to struggle in the face of adversity. He knew that everyone faced their own personal battles, some visible, some not, and that it was crucial to support others in their struggles rather than make them feel small. But this moment was different. It wasn't just a random challenge faced by a student on a basketball court. This was a boy being humiliated by a teacher, someone who should have been setting an example of kindness and respect. Jordan's blood began to boil. He couldn't just walk away. He turned and pushed open the door to the classroom, interrupting the laughter and the tension in the room. The students' eyes widened as they saw who had entered. The teacher stopped mid-laugh, clearly shocked. Michael Jordan, the legend, the superstar, was standing in the doorway of a classroom, a place where he had never imagined he would be. The room fell silent. Jordan didn't speak right away. He simply took in the scene, the teacher, standing awkwardly at the front of the class, the students still looking at him in disbelief, and the boy, who was now staring at the ground, ashamed of his struggle. Jordan could see the boy's discomfort, the way his body language spoke volumes. He didn't need to know anything else. This moment was about human decency, and Jordan knew that something had to be said. "I've seen a lot of things in my life," Jordan began, his voice calm but steady, "but this isn't right. This boy is trying, and that's what matters. We all struggle sometimes, but the last thing we should be doing is laughing at someone when they're trying to get better. Everyone has their own challenges, and that includes you, me, and everyone in this room." He turned to the teacher, his gaze sharp but not angry. "You're in a position of authority. You're here to teach, to guide, and to support. What you've done today isn't teaching. It's belittling. You can be the one person who makes a difference for these kids. And right now, you're not doing that." The teacher stood frozen, unable to respond. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the weight of the moment. But it wasn't about confrontation, it was about teaching, about showing them all that kindness and encouragement mattered more than anything else. Jordan wasn't just a basketball player in that room. He was a mentor, a figure of strength and compassion. Jordan turned his attention back to the boy, who was still standing at the front of the room, his face flushed with embarrassment. The boy looked up, meeting Jordan's gaze. For the first time that day, there was a spark in his eyes, a flicker of hope. "You're doing great," Jordan said with a smile. "Keep going. The most important thing is that you're trying. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not good enough because of how you speak. We all have our own challenges, and the real victory is in how we overcome them." The boy nodded slowly, his confidence slowly returning. Jordan's words had made an impact, and it was clear that, for him, this moment was life-changing. The teacher, still standing at the front of the room, finally found his voice, stumbling over an apology. But Jordan wasn't there for the apology. He was there to show the boy, and everyone else in the room, that people can be better, that respect and empathy could change lives. "Thank you," the boy whispered to Jordan, his voice more certain than it had been when he first began reading. Jordan gave him a nod. "Keep at it. You've got this." As he turned to leave the room, Jordan realized that, just as basketball had taught him to rise above the challenges on the court, it had also prepared him to step into situations like this. To use his platform to stand up for what was right. In that moment, he wasn't just Michael Jordan, the basketball player. He was someone who had the power to make a real difference. The door closed behind him, leaving the classroom in a still silence. But in that silence, something important had shifted, a lesson had been learned, not just by the boy, but by everyone in that room. The room, once filled with cruelty, was now filled with the possibility of change. Jordan didn't know it at the time, but his intervention in that classroom would be remembered for years to come. It would become a story told not just about him, but about the impact of standing up for others, about using your voice and your actions to create a world that's more compassionate. For Michael Jordan, the game wasn't over. It had only just begun. The day started like any other for Michael Jordan. He had just wrapped up a press conference where he spoke about his latest partnership with a new brand and answered questions about his recent performances on the court. There were the usual questions about his legacy and his influence on the younger generation. Yet, amidst the routine events, there was something different in the air. Jordan had an appointment scheduled later that afternoon to visit a local public school. It wasn't something he had planned for the media or his sponsors. It wasn't a deal. It wasn't about brand recognition. It was something personal, a chance to give back, to inspire, and maybe even learn something about himself. The school was part of a community initiative Jordan had gotten involved with. He had long supported educational programs, hoping to encourage kids to stay in school, work hard, and dream big, principles that had guided him throughout his career. What he didn't expect, however, was the moment that would forever change his perception of the power he had, not just as an athlete but as a human being with the ability to make a difference. As Jordan walked through the hallways of the school, he was greeted by students and teachers alike, all excited to see the basketball legend. Jordan smiled, gave handshakes, and exchanged pleasantries, but in the back of his mind, he was preparing for his scheduled speech. He had plans to talk to a few classes, sign some autographs, and hopefully inspire the students in ways that extended beyond his achievements on the basketball court. But as he approached the classroom for his first visit, something caught his attention. The noise. It wasn't the usual buzz of student chatter or the innocent giggles of children. It was laughter, a laughter that cut through the quiet hall. Jordan paused, momentarily confused. It wasn't the sound of children playing or making jokes. It was sharp, cruel laughter, directed at someone. Curious and unsettled, Jordan moved closer to the classroom door. He peered inside, careful not to be seen. What he witnessed in that room took him by surprise, and the shock was only deepened by the fact that it was happening in a classroom, of all places, a place meant to nurture and educate. A young boy stood at the front of the room, clutching a textbook in his hands. His voice was shaky, his words stumbling over each other, as he tried to read aloud. It wasn't that he wasn't trying, he clearly was. But the words wouldn't come out smoothly, and his stutter grew more pronounced with each passing second. The children in the room didn't offer encouragement. They didn't offer help or empathy. Instead, they laughed. The teacher, standing at the front of the class, joined in. The laughter wasn't gentle. It wasn't understanding. It was mocking. Jordan felt a wave of anger wash over him. The boy was struggling, and instead of support, he was being ridiculed by those who were supposed to be guiding him. The teacher, someone who was supposed to be an authority figure, someone who should have known better, was leading the laughter. This wasn't a classroom anymore. It was a hostile environment. The boy's face turned red. His hands shook as he tried to continue, but his voice faltered again. The teacher laughed again, this time louder. "Come on, just say it right," the teacher sneered, dismissively. "It's not that hard." Jordan's heart clenched. The boy's struggle wasn't just in that classroom, it was a daily battle, a battle that people often didn't see. To have someone laugh at you for something you couldn't control was one of the cruelest things someone could do. The boy had no control over his stutter, yet here he was, being humiliated by his teacher, who was supposed to be his guide and mentor. Jordan stepped back from the door. His instincts kicked in. He could have walked away, kept going, and acted like it wasn't his problem. But he couldn't. Not today. Not when the boy needed someone to stand up for him. Not when he knew that what was happening in that classroom could be prevented if someone just took the time to care. Without thinking, Jordan opened the door and walked into the classroom. The sounds of laughter instantly stopped as every student turned to face him. The teacher, mid-laugh, froze as he saw the basketball icon standing in the doorway. The room fell into a stunned silence. Jordan looked at the teacher, then at the students, before his eyes rested on the boy still standing at the front of the class, his face a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. The boy was trying his best, but his confidence had been shattered by the ridicule. Jordan's expression softened as he locked eyes with the boy. "You doing okay?" Jordan asked, his voice calm but strong. The boy nodded slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't believe the man who had been a hero to so many was talking to him in the middle of this moment. The room was still, everyone waiting for what would happen next. "I know how it feels to struggle," Jordan continued, looking directly at the teacher, who was still trying to gather his thoughts. "I've been there. But let me tell you something, what's happening here, this isn't the way we help each other. It's not okay to laugh at someone because they're trying." Jordan turned to the teacher, his words piercing the tension in the room. "A teacher is supposed to lift people up. It's your job to help this kid, not put him down. You should be showing him that it's okay to struggle. That we all struggle in different ways, and that's okay." The teacher stammered, clearly taken aback. I didn't mean it like that," he tried to explain, but his words faltered. Jordan wasn't interested in excuses. "No," he said firmly. "You made him feel small. And that's not something anyone should have to feel in a place like this. If he's brave enough to get up and read, then the least you can do is show some respect." The teacher, who had thought himself in control of the classroom, now stood frozen in place. The students, who had once been laughing, were now quiet, their eyes wide. Jordan's presence in that room had changed everything. Jordan turned back to the boy. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're less than. You keep going. You keep trying. And if anyone gives you trouble, you stand tall and show them who you are." With those words, the boy, who had been so embarrassed moments before, now seemed to find some courage. He nodded, his shoulders a little straighter, his face a little less anxious. Jordan smiled at him before looking around the room. "This should be a place where we help each other, not tear each other down. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. And the only way we're going to succeed is by supporting each other." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The teacher, still stunned, offered a weak apology, but it felt hollow in the face of Jordan's message. The students, who had been complicit in the laughter, now sat quietly, their expressions different. The lesson had been learned, not through discipline, but through compassion. Jordan looked at the boy one last time. "You're doing just fine. Keep going. You've got this." With that, he turned to leave, his presence leaving a lasting impression on the classroom. As the door closed behind him, the room remained still. The teacher stood silently, the students reflecting on the power of Jordan's words. And for the boy, that moment would stay with him for the rest of his life. It wasn't just Michael Jordan, the basketball legend, who had spoken to him, it was Michael Jordan, the person, who had shown him the power of kindness and understanding. Jordan had stepped into the room that day not just as a superstar, but as someone who knew the value of encouragement, who understood that greatness wasn't just about winning, it was about lifting others up, even in their most vulnerable moments. And in that classroom, that lesson had been learned by everyone, including the teacher, the students, and most of all, the boy who had struggled to be heard. The classroom remained in a tense, almost surreal silence after Michael Jordan's unexpected interruption. For a few moments, no one knew how to react. The students were still processing the shock of having their legendary basketball hero standing in their midst. The teacher, who moments ago had been laughing at a student's difficulty, stood frozen at the front of the room. But it wasn't just the teacher who had been silenced. Everyone in the room seemed to feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of Jordan's words hanging in the air. Jordan stood tall in front of the class, his presence commanding attention. He wasn't here to talk about basketball. This wasn't about his career or the endless championship wins he'd accumulated. This moment was bigger than sports, bigger than the courts he'd dominated. It was about respect, about dignity, and about offering someone a chance when they had been deprived of it. This was about human decency. Jordan took a deep breath and, without saying another word to the teacher, turned his full attention to the students. "Let me tell you all something. You're going to hear a lot of things in life, from all kinds of people. Some of them are going to tell you that you can't do something, that you're not good enough, that you should just give up. Some people will make fun of you for things that are beyond your control, and they'll try to make you feel small for something that doesn't define you. That's what you just saw here today. He paused, letting his words sink in. The students sat quietly, eyes wide, as they listened to the man who had inspired millions of people around the world speak not about basketball, but about life. Jordan's voice, which had once commanded arenas filled with thousands of cheering fans, now spoke softly but firmly in that small classroom, carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. You all know that I'm not just a basketball player. I've been through a lot in my life. I've faced my own struggles, my own doubts. You think I was always this good? You think I was always this confident? No. There were days when I wasn't even sure I'd make it. I got cut from my high school basketball team, remember? You think that didn't hurt? It did. But what I learned through all of that is that failure isn't what defines you. It's not the mistakes you make, or the times you fall down. What defines you is how you get back up. How you keep going, no matter how hard it gets. Jordan's eyes moved slowly over the students. They were hanging on to every word. What happened today, what you saw and hear, isn't just about this boy. It's about all of you. It's about all of us. Life will throw things at you, and some of it is going to knock you down. You can't control that. But what you can control is how you treat people. You can control your actions, your words. And let me tell you, words are powerful. They can build someone up or tear them down in an instant. Jordan turned back to the teacher, who had been standing uncomfortably, his head slightly lowered in shame. And that's the real issue here. You had a chance to be a teacher. To be someone who helps this boy grow, who encourages him. But instead, you laughed. And that's not right. No one should ever laugh at someone trying to better themselves. The teacher stood there, his face flushed with guilt. His mind raced as he processed what Jordan had just said. He had been caught in the act, exposed in front of his students and now, in front of someone who had the power to change lives simply by showing up. The weight of his actions had never been clearer, but he had no words to defend himself. Jordan wasn't done. I've always believed in helping people reach their full potential. You're in a classroom for a reason, you're here to learn and to teach. But teaching isn't just about passing along facts. It's about helping others understand their value, to believe in themselves, even when they're struggling. We all struggle. And when someone's struggling, they need encouragement, not ridicule. He took another step toward the front of the room, standing between the teacher and the students, positioning himself as the bridge between right and wrong, showing them what it meant to be human and to care. We all have something that challenges us. For this boy, it's his speech. For others, it could be math, or reading, or anything. We all face difficulties. But what matters most is how we respond to those difficulties. You can either laugh at someone who's struggling, or you can help them rise above it. The choice is yours. Jordan's eyes softened as he turned back to the boy who had been the target of the teacher's cruel laughter. The boy had been silent for much of the interaction, his head down, his hands clasped tightly together. But now, after hearing Jordan's words, he looked up. There was something different in his eyes, hope, maybe even relief. The boy, who had once been embarrassed and humiliated in front of his classmates, now had a sense of dignity restored. He wasn't just another kid who struggled with a stutter. He was someone worthy of respect. Hey, don't let anyone make you feel bad about who you are, Jordan said gently, walking over to the boy. You're doing great. The important thing is that you're trying. And no matter what, that's always enough. You've got a voice. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't. Keep pushing. You're not alone in this. The boy's eyes began to fill with tears, but they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of recognition, the realization that someone cared, that he wasn't invisible in a world that often overlooked people like him. Jordan's words had given him something more than just encouragement. They had given him the confidence to continue fighting through his struggles, to rise above the mockery, and to know that his worth wasn't defined by a stutter or any other challenge he faced. Jordan turned back to the class. We all have a responsibility to help each other. No one succeeds on their own. We need to be there for one another, to lift each other up. That's how we all become better. He paused for a moment, letting his message sink in. The students, many of whom had been complicit in the laughter earlier, now sat quietly, reflecting on the lesson that had just been delivered to them. They had witnessed something rare, not just a lesson in empathy, but an example of how someone could use their position of power to make a real difference in someone's life. Jordan didn't wait for the teacher to speak or offer an apology. He didn't need to hear words that could never undo the damage. His intervention had already done what it needed to do. The room had changed. The atmosphere had shifted. A new understanding had been established, not through force, but through compassion and leadership. He looked at the boy one last time before turning to leave. "You've got this," he said. "And everyone in here should remember what we just learned today." With that, Jordan left the room, his footsteps echoing in the now silent space. The lesson had been learned, but it was far from over. The impact of what had just occurred would resonate far beyond the walls of that classroom, reaching into the hearts of every student, every teacher, and anyone who had ever faced adversity. And it all started with a single act of kindness, a powerful speech from someone who didn't just play the game, but who understood the true power of lifting others up. In the few moments following Michael Jordan's intervention, the atmosphere in the classroom was thick with a mixture of discomfort, reflection, and a strange sense of clarity. The students, who had been complicit in the laughter, now sat in stunned silence, their previous attitudes shifting into quiet contemplation. The teacher, still standing at the front of the class, was the most affected by the events unfolding. Jordan had spoken with authority and compassion, and his words cut through the layers of defensiveness that had shielded the teacher's conscience. The once confident educator, who had likely never questioned his behavior before, now found himself standing exposed, his actions laid bare in front of the class. He had not only failed his student, but he had also failed the most basic responsibility of any teacher, to nurture, to uplift, and to support. For the teacher, this was a pivotal moment. In the presence of a living legend, someone he had admired from afar for his skill and success, he found himself the target of a moral reckoning. Jordan had put the teacher in a position where he had to confront the harshness of his own actions. The laughter at the boy's expense wasn't just an isolated mistake, it was a reflection of a larger, systemic issue that affected not only this classroom but the education system as a whole. The teacher opened his mouth, trying to find the words, but they eluded him. How do you apologize for something so deeply ingrained, something that had become part of the routine? How do you explain that you hadn't even realized the harm you'd caused until it was laid out so plainly? He began, but his voice faltered. Jordan turned back to him. "It's not about saying sorry," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's about what you do next. It's about how you move forward from here." The teacher nodded, still lost for words. He had heard criticisms before, had received feedback and evaluations from his superiors, but this was different. It wasn't just a comment on his teaching methods. This was a challenge to his very approach to what it meant to be an educator. He had been in the profession for years, yet he realized in that moment how little he had truly understood the role he played in shaping his students' lives, especially when it came to their emotional well-being. Jordan wasn't interested in making the teacher feel guilty, he wasn't here to chastise him for his behavior. He was here to show him, and everyone in the room, what true leadership looked like, not the kind of leadership that demanded respect through authority, but the kind that earned respect through action and empathy. It was clear to Jordan that the teacher had the potential to make a positive difference in the lives of his students. But it would require a shift in how he viewed his role as an educator and as a mentor. The teacher took a deep breath and finally spoke, his voice shaky. "You're right, Michael. I wasn't thinking. I didn't see it like that. He stopped himself, struggling to put his thoughts into words. "I don't know what came over me." Jordan gave him a look of understanding. "We all make mistakes. But it's how we handle them that counts. The teacher nodded again, swallowing hard. I've been doing this for so long, and I guess I thought it was just part of the job. You know, pushing students to be better, to improve. But I never considered how much they might be struggling inside. The weight of his words hung in the air. The teacher wasn't just apologizing for mocking the boy, he was acknowledging that he had been blind to the deeper struggles his students faced. The truth was that education didn't just take place in the classroom. It was a process that involved emotional support, guidance, and encouragement. Teachers weren't just responsible for delivering lessons, they were responsible for fostering a safe space where their students felt valued, seen, and respected. Jordan's gaze softened as he watched the teacher wrestle with his own realizations. It's not easy, Jordan said, his voice reassuring. You're going to slip up. We all do. But the key is to keep showing up, keep learning, and keep helping. That's all you can do. The teacher took another deep breath, finally feeling the weight lift from his chest. He looked at the students, who were still processing the moment. I'm sorry, he said, his voice quiet but sincere. I'll do better. I promise. I should have been more patient. I should have been more kind. The apology was a small step, but it was significant. It wasn't just a teacher admitting fault, it was a teacher acknowledging that his role wasn't limited to teaching academic subjects. His job was to care for the whole student, to see beyond the grades and the assignments, and to recognize the emotional and psychological battles that every student faced. Jordan turned his attention back to the students. This is what I mean when I say you've got to lift each other up. It's easy to make fun of someone when they're struggling. But it takes strength to show empathy and compassion. The students, many of whom had been silent witnesses to the incident, now seemed to understand the gravity of what had just occurred. They had seen someone stand up to authority, not to challenge it for the sake of rebellion, but to challenge it for the sake of doing what was right. The boys and girls in that classroom weren't just learning about history or math, they were learning about kindness, about how to treat people with dignity, regardless of their weaknesses. Jordan's words resonated with the class. For some of them, it was the first time they had heard such a powerful message about how to interact with others. They had been conditioned to think of the world in terms of competition, of winning and losing. But what Jordan was teaching them was something far more valuable, the importance of standing up for the underdog, of using one's power to help others rise. As Jordan made his way toward the door, he paused, giving one last look at the teacher, who was now standing a little taller, his shoulders less slumped. The teacher had taken responsibility for his actions, and that was the first step toward changing not just his own behavior, but the environment in which his students would learn. Before he left, Jordan turned to the students. Remember this, he said. None of you are defined by what other people say about you. You are defined by how you treat each other, how you help each other become better. That's how you win in life. Not just on the court, but everywhere. With those final words, Jordan left the classroom, leaving behind a group of students who would never forget what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a basketball legend who had walked into that room, it was a man who understood the true power of kindness, compassion, and leadership. The teacher, now standing in front of his class, took a moment to gather himself. He knew that the lesson he had just learned was one that would stay with him forever. It wasn't just about fixing a mistake. It was about becoming a better version of himself, a version who would go on to truly inspire the next generation. The day Michael Jordan walked into that classroom and intervened in such a powerful way, the ripple effects of his actions were felt far beyond that room. Jordan had come to the school not as a basketball legend, but as a human being, someone who understood that his position in life came with a responsibility to influence others in ways that mattered. In doing so, he had ignited a spark of change that would spread throughout the school, changing not only the boy who had been mocked, but also every person who had witnessed the scene. The teacher, though embarrassed by the moment, had started a process of introspection. He had recognized his own shortcomings and was now grappling with the responsibility of becoming a better educator, not just in terms of academic instruction, but in fostering an environment where every student felt safe and valued. The impact of Jordan's words would stick with him for much longer than any lesson plan he could devise. The students who had laughed earlier were now reflecting on their actions, and the quiet atmosphere that followed Jordan's speech wasn't just the result of shock or awe. It was a moment of reckoning. The group of young people who had once dismissed the boy with the stutter now found themselves reconsidering what it meant to be kind, what it meant to truly help someone rise above their struggles. This wasn't just about respecting differences, it was about understanding how easy it was to hurt someone and how essential it was to take responsibility for that. Among the students was a girl named Emily, who had been one of the first to laugh at the boy's stutter. She hadn't meant to be cruel, but in that moment, the laughter had been an impulsive reaction, something that stemmed from the discomfort of seeing someone struggle. She wasn't the only one to laugh, but as she sat in the silence of the classroom after Jordan's words, she felt a deep sense of guilt. She had seen the boy's face turn red with embarrassment, and now, thinking back on it, she realized that her laughter had added to his humiliation. Emily knew she had to make things right. Later that day, when the class was over and everyone was filing out of the room, she approached the boy. "Hey," she said quietly, unsure of how to begin. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't mean to laugh at you, and I can't imagine how hard that must have been for you." The boy looked up, surprised but grateful. He nodded slowly, and for the first time that day, a small smile appeared on his face. "I just get nervous sometimes," the boy said, his voice still soft but a bit steadier. "I didn't know what to do, so I just froze." "You're not alone," Emily said. "We all freeze sometimes. I shouldn't have laughed. I'm sorry." It was a simple conversation, but it had a profound impact on both of them. Emily had learned an important lesson about empathy, about how to own up to her mistakes and, more importantly, how to offer kindness in a way that truly mattered. The boy, on the other hand, felt something he hadn't felt all day, the power of being seen and heard. For a moment, he wasn't the kid who stuttered. He was just another student, treated with the respect everyone deserves. Meanwhile, the teacher also began his own journey of change. He spent the next several days reflecting on his behavior, reading up on ways to create a more inclusive and supportive environment in his classroom. He realized that his actions had been an extension of his own impatience, and that impatience had been passed on to his students. As much as he prided himself on being a good teacher, he now saw that his job wasn't just about delivering lessons on paper, it was about teaching life lessons, and those required a level of patience, care, and respect that he had neglected. The next time the boy with the stutter read aloud in class, the teacher was ready. Instead of focusing on how quickly the boy could finish the paragraph or how smoothly he could speak, the teacher encouraged him, offering words of support and reassurance. The atmosphere in the room had changed, not because the teacher was doing anything differently on the surface, but because he had embraced the idea that every student, no matter their challenges, deserved to feel supported. His approach to teaching had transformed into one that valued emotional growth just as much as academic progress. The other students noticed the shift. They watched as their teacher became more patient, more understanding, and more present with each student's individual needs. They began to model his behavior, offering help when they saw someone struggling, and creating an environment where everyone, no matter their background or difficulties, could thrive. In the weeks that followed, Jordan's visit to the school began to resonate more and more with the students. It wasn't just the boy who had been the target of ridicule who felt changed, it was the entire class. The laughter that once filled the room was now replaced with moments of encouragement and support. The group, which had once been a collection of individuals, began to act as a unit, a team. They helped each other through difficult lessons, celebrated each other's successes, and, perhaps most importantly, became aware of the ways they could lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. The school itself began to notice the shift in its students. Teachers and staff members reported a more positive atmosphere in the classrooms, with fewer incidents of bullying and more moments of kindness. The boy who had once been the subject of laughter was now actively participating in class, no longer silenced by fear or self-doubt. His confidence grew with every passing day, and he started speaking up more in class, even volunteering to answer questions. The students who had once made fun of him began to support him, offering words of encouragement when he hesitated. The boy's transformation wasn't just in his speech, it was in his spirit, his belief in himself, and the realization that he had a place in the world, no matter how different he felt. Jordan's influence extended beyond that one classroom. His visit had sparked a shift in the entire school. Teachers began holding workshops on empathy, inclusion, and how to create a safe environment for all students. The principal, who had heard about the incident, decided to implement programs that focused on teaching emotional intelligence alongside academic subjects. The school became a model for others, proving that when students and teachers learn to care for one another, the effects can be felt far beyond the walls of the classroom. The boy, whose name was Tim, eventually went on to excel academically. But it wasn't just his grades that improved, it was his sense of self-worth. He participated in class discussions, took on leadership roles in group projects, and, most importantly, felt comfortable in his own skin. He no longer feared speaking in front of others. He knew that his stutter didn't define him, and neither did the laughter he had once faced. Years later, Tim would look back on that day with gratitude. He had met Michael Jordan, but more importantly, he had learned that true greatness wasn't about talent or accolades. It was about compassion, the willingness to stand up for what was right, and the courage to be kind even when it wasn't easy. Jordan's visit to the classroom had left an indelible mark on all of them. It wasn't the kind of legacy you could see on a basketball court or in the pages of a history book. But it was a legacy that would shape the lives of every person who was there, because the greatest victories, Jordan had shown them, were those that weren't won with points or trophies, but with the way we treat each other. In the weeks following Michael Jordan's intervention in that classroom, the ripples of change spread far beyond the school. His act of kindness had set off a chain reaction, and the effects were felt not just by the boy who had been humiliated, but by the entire school community. It wasn't just the apology from the teacher or the courage the boy gained that day, it was the realization that kindness, empathy, and respect could transform not only individuals, but entire environments. The students, once indifferent or even complicit in the laughter, began to rethink their own actions. It was no longer enough to stand by and say nothing when someone else was being wronged. The lesson Michael Jordan had imparted was simple but powerful: everyone has value, and how we treat each other shapes the world we live in. At the heart of this transformation was Emily, one of the students who had laughed at the boy's stutter earlier that day. She had been embarrassed by her actions and had apologized to the boy, but she knew that it wasn't just about saying the right words. It was about changing the way she saw others. For weeks, she kept thinking about what Jordan had said about rising above the impulse to tear others down. She had watched how the boy's confidence grew after the intervention, and she realized that his courage wasn't just about his struggle with speech, it was about overcoming the adversity of being judged, of being made to feel small. Emily began making an effort to talk to students who were often ignored, those who didn't fit in with the popular crowd, and she found herself growing closer to people she had never paid much attention to before. Her actions were subtle, an encouraging word here, a compliment there, but they had a lasting effect. She became a part of a growing movement within the school that was centered around kindness, empathy, and understanding. The teachers, too, began to reflect on their own practices. The incident with the teacher who had laughed at the boy had shaken the faculty, forcing them to take a closer look at their roles not only as educators but as guides and mentors. Many of them were well-meaning, but like the teacher who had been so quick to dismiss the boy's struggle, they had become complacent in their teaching styles. They had prioritized academics and performance over the emotional and psychological well-being of their students. After the incident, several teachers approached the principal with ideas on how to create a more supportive and inclusive environment. They began integrating social-emotional learning into their lesson plans and emphasized the importance of creating classrooms where students felt comfortable expressing themselves. The school organized workshops for teachers on how to identify and address subtle forms of bullying and how to create spaces where students could thrive, not just academically, but emotionally as well. One teacher, Mrs. Davis, a veteran educator who had taught for over 20 years, found herself deeply moved by Jordan's message. She had been unaware of how many of her students struggled with self-esteem issues, and she realized how easy it had been to focus solely on grades and performance. Mrs. Davis began incorporating more activities that promoted teamwork and positive reinforcement. She made sure to spend time with students one-on-one, asking them how they were doing outside of the classroom and listening to their concerns. Slowly, the atmosphere in her classroom began to change. Her students, once passive and disengaged, now showed more interest in each other's well-being. They celebrated each other's successes, and when one of them struggled, the class rallied around them with support. The principal, Mr. Matthews, was also moved by the events. He had been a strong proponent of academic excellence, but he realized that a school environment couldn't thrive if the emotional needs of the students weren't being met. He organized school-wide initiatives to promote empathy and kindness, and he made sure that the teachers were equipped with the resources they needed to help students who were struggling with issues outside of academics. Mr. Matthews also reached out to community organizations to provide counseling and support services for students dealing with bullying, family issues, and personal struggles. One of the most significant changes in the school came from the students themselves. They had witnessed the power of standing up for someone, of being the person who spoke out against cruelty, rather than being the one who contributed to it. The ripple effect of Jordan's actions had reached far beyond the teachers' laughter. It had given the students the courage to speak up for each other, to defend those who couldn't defend themselves, and to change the culture of their school. Tim, the boy who had been mocked, was perhaps the most transformed of all. After Jordan's words of encouragement, he began to speak more confidently in class. It wasn't just that his stutter improved, though it did, in part because of the encouragement he received from his peers. It was that he began to believe in his own worth. The shame that had once clouded his every interaction lifted, and he stepped into the classroom with his head held high. Tim became more involved in school activities, joining the debate team and eventually running for a student government position. His journey was not without its challenges. There were still days when the stutter returned, when his confidence wavered, but now, when it happened, he didn't shrink away. He didn't retreat into silence. Instead, he stood tall and carried on, knowing that he had the support of his classmates and teachers. The boy who had once been ridiculed was now a leader in his school, and it all started with one person standing up for him. Tim's story wasn't just about overcoming a stutter. It was about overcoming the feelings of inadequacy and fear that had once defined him. The ripple effect of that day, of Jordan's intervention, had empowered not just Tim, but the entire school to embrace vulnerability and growth. They learned that strength didn't come from hiding our flaws, it came from accepting them, learning from them, and helping others do the same. Months later, when Jordan returned to the school for another visit, he was greeted not with fanfare, but with gratitude. The students and faculty had embraced the lessons he had instilled in them. The culture of the school had shifted, and it was evident in the way they interacted with each other. Students of all backgrounds and abilities worked together to support one another. They celebrated each other's differences rather than mocking them. The school had become a place where everyone was valued, where success was measured not just in academic achievements but in the quality of their relationships and the support they offered each other. Jordan's visit that day, one that had begun with an interruption, had sparked a revolution of kindness and understanding. It had shown the students and faculty that even small acts of courage, like speaking up in a difficult moment, could have an immeasurable impact. For Jordan, this was a reminder of the importance of using one's influence to change lives, to help those who may never step onto a basketball court but who deserve the same level of respect and encouragement. The ripple effect of his actions wasn't just felt in that classroom, it spread far beyond it, affecting the lives of everyone involved. And as time passed, the impact of that single moment continued to reverberate through the halls of the school, reminding everyone who walked through its doors that true greatness lies not in how many trophies you win, but in how you lift others up along the way. It had been months since Michael Jordan's unexpected intervention in the classroom, and the ripple effects of that day continued to reverberate. The boy who had once been the subject of ridicule had transformed before everyone's eyes, gaining the confidence to not only face his stutter but to embrace his uniqueness. His classmates, who had once laughed at him, now looked up to him, no longer viewing his differences as weaknesses, but as part of what made him special. The school, too, had undergone a transformation. The atmosphere was different now, filled with empathy and understanding, rather than mockery and exclusion. Jordan's intervention had set something in motion, something bigger than basketball, something that had changed not just the lives of the students, but the faculty, and even the community that supported the school. It had reminded them that being a hero wasn't about winning trophies or championships, it was about standing up for what's right, using your voice to lift others, and creating an environment where everyone felt valued. The boy, Tim, had become a symbol of that change. No longer the quiet, insecure kid at the back of the class, he had blossomed into someone who was confident, proud of who he was, and determined to succeed in his own way. He ran for student council, gave speeches at school events, and became a mentor to younger students, showing them that their voices, no matter how hesitant they may seem at first, were worth hearing. Tim's story wasn't just one of overcoming a personal challenge, it was one of realizing his own potential, a potential that had always been there, waiting to be acknowledged. One day, as Tim stood before a classroom of younger students, preparing to speak at a school assembly, he couldn't help but think back to that day, months earlier, when Michael Jordan had walked into that classroom. He remembered the way he had felt in the moments before Jordan had spoken to him, how small and insignificant he had felt, and how those feelings had shifted the moment Jordan had spoken to him, not just as a basketball legend, but as a human being who understood the weight of struggle. "I know what it feels like to be doubted," Tim said to the younger students, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But I also know what it feels like to find your voice. You may struggle. You may face obstacles. But that doesn't make you any less than anyone else." The students listened intently, and for a moment, Tim could see in their eyes what he had once seen in his own reflection: uncertainty, doubt, the fear of not being enough. But just as Jordan had done for him, he was offering them a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. It wasn't just about what they could achieve academically or athletically, it was about knowing that they were worthy of respect, worthy of kindness, no matter their background or their challenges. Meanwhile, Michael Jordan had continued his work off the court, using his platform to inspire others in ways that extended beyond basketball. He had been a coach, a mentor, and a role model to many, but it was his role in that classroom that had left the deepest impression. Jordan's commitment to using his fame for good had always been a core part of his identity. But it was moments like these, moments when he could directly impact someone's life, that reminded him of why he had always loved the game, not just for the victories or the accolades, but for the chance to connect with others, to make a difference. As the months went by, the school community saw continued growth. Teachers, once focused solely on academics, began integrating more emotional intelligence lessons into their curriculum. They taught students how to communicate with empathy, how to handle conflict with compassion, and how to create a community of respect. The boy who had been humiliated in class no longer needed to hide his stutter. Instead, he wore it with pride, knowing that his struggle didn't define him, it was merely a part of who he was. Jordan occasionally checked in on the school's progress, offering words of encouragement and advice when needed. But he didn't need to do much, he had planted the seed of change, and now it was growing on its own. The school had become a place where students were not only learning algebra or history, but they were also learning about kindness, empathy, and the importance of standing up for one another. And this wasn't just limited to the students, the faculty had learned, too. Teachers and staff members came to understand that their role was not just to educate, but to cultivate a safe space where students felt valued and supported. As Jordan reflected on the events of that day, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had done more than just change one person's life, he had sparked a movement that had affected an entire community. The lessons learned in that classroom were lessons that would echo through the halls for years to come. And even though Jordan had no idea when he walked into that classroom how profoundly his words would impact everyone there, he now saw the full effect of his intervention. He thought about his career, about all the championships and MVPs, and while those accomplishments were significant, they didn't hold the same weight as this. This was the true legacy, not just the ability to perform on the court, but the ability to affect change in the world off of it. It wasn't about the shoes or the commercials or the fame, it was about the moments like the one he had experienced in that classroom, where the smallest act of kindness could alter the course of a life. One evening, as Jordan sat in his home, surrounded by family, friends, and colleagues, he found himself reflecting on his life, on the people he had influenced and the people who had influenced him. He thought about the boy with the stutter, the teacher who had learned a lesson in humility, and the students who had embraced a new understanding of what it meant to treat each other with dignity. He thought about the teacher's apology, the boy's transformation, and the way the entire school had changed as a result of one simple act of standing up for someone. And in that quiet moment, Jordan knew that his true legacy would live on in ways that went far beyond the basketball courts. It would live on in the hearts of those who had witnessed his words that day, and the students who would grow up knowing how to treat others with respect, and in the knowledge that kindness could change lives just as much as talent could. It wasn't just about being the best, it was about making others better, lifting them up when they needed it most. Michael Jordan's journey had been about far more than winning championships. It had been about becoming a better person, learning how to use his platform for good, and showing others how to do the same. The greatest victory, he realized, was not the one on the court, it was the one where he helped someone find their voice, their confidence, and their place in the world. This was the victory that mattered most. And it was the victory that would last long after the final buzzer.